Hi, everybody. Welcome to Radiator Comics Studio. My name is Neil Brideau. My pronouns are he, him. I run Radiator Comics, which distributes self-published and small press comics. Radiator Comics Studio is a series of online programs and print publications designed to support and expand the cartooning community in South Florida and to connect it with the national comic scene. Radiator Comics Studio is supported by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and we're grateful for their support. We are broadcasting today from Miccosukee land. The people from whom the land was stolen are still here and are still caring for this place. It's also important to acknowledge the history of African-American, Bahamian, Haitian, and other Caribbean people whose labor made South Florida what it is today. We have a lifelong responsibility to be better neighbors to the people and places where we're located and to work to dismantle white supremacy. Expressing one's ideas and feelings through comics and zines can be really powerful. And one of our hopes is that programming like this evening's can make those tools of expression more accessible. So we're grateful to have you here with us today. And I'd like to welcome our presenters, Carina Vo, Diego A. Infante, and Yasmin Omar Ata. I'm really looking forward to tonight's presentations from these wonderful Florida-based cartoonists who will be talking about their approaches to adding color to their comics and illustrations. Each presentation is roughly 10 minutes in length, and after that, we'll open up the event to questions. So I'm going to introduce the presenters and then hand it over to them. So our first presenter will be Carina Vo. Carina is a Miami-based illustrator with a deep love for comics, cartoons, and anime. While she mostly creates standalone illustrations, she contributed Mango City to the Sun and Sand comic anthology and occasionally creates single panel comics. Through her work, she addresses her own interactions with the world and mental health through creating characters in semi-surrealist situations. So welcome, Carina. Our second presenter will be Diego Infante. Diego is a cartoonist and visual artist from Venezuela. He grew up in Miami and has been drawing and painting cartoon characters since he learned how to hold a pencil. In 2015, he started creating comics in his high school sketchbooks. And in 2016, he self-published his first comic, Children of Argus. Since then, he's self-published over 5 titles, including his first 103-page graphic novel, Scorpia and the Smiling Freaks, and is currently working on a reboot series of The Children of Argus and a new graphic novel titled Los Pesados. So welcome, Diego. And then our third presenter this evening will be Yasmin Omar Ata. Yasmin is a Middle Eastern and Muslim comics artist, game developer, and illustrator who creates art about coping with illness, understanding identity, dismantling oppressive structures, and Islamic futurism. They are currently working on 2 books with Viking Books, the first of which is to be released in 2022. Yasmin is an Ignatz Award winner and an Excellence in Graphic Literature Award finalist who has worked with clients and groups such as PEN America, L'Institut du Monde Arabe, Palestine International, Big Mouth Comics, College Humor, OR Books, and many more. So welcome, Yasmin, and welcome all 3 of you. I'm super excited about this. I am going to hand the presentation over to Carina now.
Hello. Hi. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. And if I hit present, do you guys see this? Okay, cool. So yeah, first off, thank you, Neil, for hosting as always. And yeah, so my name is Carina. This is how I spell it online. And I was very intimidated by color. It was only recently that I really started thinking about it more. And I'll kind of talk about my different eras of color palettes and how I got to my philosophy and my approach today with color. So yeah, yeah. So when I started drawing, it was mostly with pen and ink. My uncle gifted me some Copic markers, which I probably would have never gotten myself because they're really expensive. And it was really good to start with like a limited amount of colors because I started understanding what I was just naturally drawn towards. So here I was using like a lot of primary colors. I really like fell in love with this like lighter green, I guess like sort of chartreuse, and this started like informing like and shaping like the colors that I liked. Yeah, so then I started coloring digitally, and then I entered this like really like vibrant era where I kind of went wild with color, and I was using this like circled corner of the color picker specifically because I was like, okay, I have like this infinite amount of color. So, you know, like for brand consistency and whatever, and to like really, I guess, come up with a style, I was like, okay, I have to think of like a palette and I have to stick to like one specific area of the color picker. And like, this is kind of what I went for when I started coloring digitally because I was like, I was used to markers and like I felt like I was able to achieve colors that I wouldn't have gotten traditionally. So yeah, I went really, really wild in this era, but and it was fun. It was a good time. It definitely like gave me time to experiment with color. Um, but I ended up not like, for lack of a better word, I ended up not really vibing with this anymore. Um, and I started giving myself eye strain just from looking at all these like bright colors all the time. Um, and I realized that I kind of wanted to like do something a little more toned down, because I realized that like when I was like looking at art and like other sorts of media, like I was definitely more drawn to things that had, you know, a calmer tone. Uh, so then I entered my pastel era and I went in the completely opposite direction. And again, I like literally cornered myself, um, by focusing on like this corner of the color picker, which is like the pastel zone, I guess. And like, you know, using like the occasional darker blue, the occasional black, the occasional like pop of red. But so this is, I was like, okay, like I'm vibing with this more, but I still feel very like trapped in a corner. And I still feel like I can only use like 5 colors. I feel like I don't really um, know if I can grow with this. Um, yeah, so then then I realized, and I could not stop realizing that what I really wanted to focus on was like a mood over like a set palette of colors. Um, Also, just disclaimer, like out of context, this screen looks like I am saying like absolutely mood is better than palette. That's not what I'm saying. This is just like what works for me. Um, so yeah, I realized that I wanted to focus on like mood and vibe, and like instead of picking like, okay, I'm gonna use this red, this green, this blue, this yellow, um, I want to instead create like a feeling, and I want to instead like kind of catch a vibe, I guess, if you will. Um, so what I started doing was using photography as reference, which like, wow, who would have thunk? I didn't use photography very much as color reference. I started like collecting images like on Pinterest. I made a Pinterest board to collect images like photography for like pose reference. But I feel like I didn't really start using photography as reference for color until now. So this is kind of a glimpse at like the photography that I use for reference. And the more I was like collecting images, the more I realized that there was like this consistent theme and like a very like overarching, not necessarily palette again, but vibe. I mean, um, so I noticed that I was really into like generally neutral with like a pop of color too. And even if there are like a lot of really vibrant colors, it has like a toned down feel, kind of like, I guess, like film photography. you know, old like 90s magazines, like, you know, that's generally what I found myself drawn towards. And so I started just color picking from images. And because I tried just having it to the side and like eyeballing it, but it's kind of hard. And like when you're painting a sky, for example, you would think like, oh, okay, like a sunset is yellow, pink, red, maybe a little blue. But there's like, you think of that logically, but you don't think of like the midtones. Like I painted a sky for the first time. Here on the right, this is like the first time I've ever actually painted a sky. And like I was using like fleshy browns and like colors that I didn't really think, like I don't really think like, oh yeah, there's brown in the sky, but I was just color picking straight from the photo, and this is, you know, those were the colors that were in the photo. On the right is an image that I wasn't color picking from any photo specifically, but this was just me trying to like show like that, I guess, neutral thing with like pops of color. Yeah, so just focusing on creating that mood. Yeah. This is reference from like a Twitter photo, but it really resonated with me. And again, this was like directly color picked. This was something that I did try to color without color picking, but I don't think I would have been able to do it. And the more you do it, like, you know, like the more you use reference for poses, like you will be able to eventually like gain an understanding of just what colors go where and like how colors work together, especially with like lighting and shading and like in relation to each other and in the context of the image. So another thing that has helped a lot with like creating a mood is I never start with a pure white canvas anymore. I usually start with this beige that is my presentation background right now. Or if I know that the end image that I want is going to have like a cooler tone, I'll start with like a very light blue. I'm not sure why this works. I just think that looking at a white canvas can be really daunting because it's just so stark and like, yeah, I'm not sure what the psychology is exactly, but also just, it just feels like a nice first step. Like you're putting down a color, even if it's like barely a color, like it's just a nice like first step to take. And it feels good. So it kind of like gets the ball rolling a bit. And so something I do want to say about like mood and palette, I definitely keep like colors that I really, really like saved and unlocked because I, you know, if I'm drawing something not from reference, I want to, you know what colors to use. But keeping in mind that mood that I want to create of like, oh, like, you know, like sort of faded. It's kind of like you're looking at like a faded piece of paper, I guess. So like this neon yellow greenish box that I have in the corner, like that's a color that I've been really interested in using lately. But translated into this image, it's not that exact yellow. So when I color dropped it, I kind of like adjusted it, you know, like desaturated it a little, maybe darkened it a little just to fit the overall mood of this drawing. Yeah, and just kind of just building around like adding, let me think of how to say this. When I color, like I think a lot about like the colors relationships to each other, which is not something that really clicked for me until later. Like I would be like, okay, I want to use this extremely bright red next to this really like pastel, I don't know, something else. Um, I just, it's important to think about how the colors interact with each other and how they look as a whole rather than being like, okay, I'm going to use this color, this color, this color. which is how I was thinking about things before when I was trying to contextualize things in like palettes and like, I'm going to use like these 5 colors. Yeah. So aside from picking colors, these are the brushes I use. I use Procreate. And so to color the base, I usually just put down a flat brush. Like this is, these brushes are free. This brush pack is free. If you have Procreate, you just search Procreate All-Star brushes and it will give you a whole pack. And this is the first one in that pack. And it's a completely flat brush. And that's what I use to lay down the base color. And then these 3, the flat brush, acrylic, and wet acrylic, are what I've been using for shading and lighting. And the reason I don't just use like a solid brush anymore is because the flat brush and the painting brushes kind of like automatically catch those midtones for you. Like they'll give me a subtle transition that a flat brush doesn't give me. And that's just like a personal preference that I've been developing as I'm like learning more about digital painting. Yeah, and then I have quick little speed color to show my coloring process. So the way I organize layers, like the hair, the skin, will usually be a single layer, and then different objects in the background will be separate layers. So like the smiley faces are their own layer, the stars were their own layer, the letters also became their own layer. Their clothes are their own layer. And the reason I separate it like that is, you know, for the sake of shading. If I want to specifically shade or light her skin, for example, I just clip a layer to that and just shade so that I'm not coloring like outside of the lines, the color. Yeah, so and yeah, lighting is still very confusing to me, but it's a process. And yeah. Yeah, so that is a really quick look at my process. It's very like straightforward, very simple. I mostly spoke about like my approach and like picking colors because that ended up being like the most difficult thing for me always. And that was probably always like the most intimidating thing to me that like stopped me from really exploring or even liking coloring. I used to like genuinely dislike coloring. I wanted to like have someone else color all of my drawings for me because it was just like I was really overthinking it. But yeah, using reference for sure has like helped me, and just like really thinking about it in terms of like feelings, I guess, because I'm a very, you know, feelings based person. And colors just didn't really feel logical to me. I'm completely self-taught. I don't know too much about color theory besides like the very basics. So contextualizing it in like mood and like how does this make me feel like helped like I guess humanize colors a little bit and be a little less intimidating. So oops, I don't know how to do that again. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's my presentation.
Well, thanks so much, Karina. That was really fantastic. I'm totally a sucker for process videos, but also it was really great to just like see before we like started recording. We were talking about like how intimidating coloring can be, and so it's like really great to see sort of your evolution in how you thought about coloring and like how you became more comfortable with coloring. It's like helps demystify things and
Yeah, that was my my ultimate goal, because yeah, like I said, coloring was so scary to me. And now I'm starting to enjoy it. So that's cool. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And our next presenter is Diego Infante.
How's it going? Can you guys hear me or?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let me just put my presentation. All right, can you see this? Cool. All right, so hi, I'm Diego, and this is my coloring presentation. All right, so a little bit about me. Basically I'm a cartoonist, which means I'm a writer and illustrator. So pretty much like the whole process of the comics and graphic novels that I make, I do most of it, or all of it really. I have a fascination for sci-fi and space and aliens and all that stuff. But I'm also into like westerns. I'm into like horror movies, horror stories, and different things that kind of all have like a very different tone. And I'm learning about animation right now to kind of like bring my characters to life in a different way, and not just comics, but also like making them kind of come more alive. So a big thing about color is that it's actually a really big part of the visual identity of each one of my stories. So each one of my stories has like a very different tone. My first big major graphic novel, it's a story that, the character goes through a lot of trauma, and I really wanted to show like warm colors, just because it kind of fit with that whole tone and what the character was going through. For my other series, which is Children of Argus, it's more for like sci-fi and more for kids and everything. So I try to like make it as vibrant as I can. But even though like each character still has like their own kind of color that represents them. And so it's really each book has like a very different visual identity, mainly because of that. And the one that I'm working on now, which is Los Pesados, it's actually a challenge for me because I'm used to doing a lot of color. But this one, I'm actually tackling it in complete black and white, eliminating the kind of the way that I'm thinking of color and just like making it all just black and white. And it's a very different thought process too, but it also plays into the story really well. But yeah, that's a little bit about the stories that I do and how the color relates to them. The process itself that I use, it varies from time to time, but for the most part, it kind of goes like this. So first thing I do is like the outlines and everything. Well, first is a sketch, then it's the outline. After the outline, I actually go into flats. And the important thing about flats is that, you got to make sure that there's like high contrast between the character and the backgrounds. You want to make sure that, because that's the color that you're really going to see at the end. And so you want to make sure that that's like as like final as you can see it. But after that, you start like adding different things. So with the gradient, it's interesting because it starts adding like 3D elements to it. So now you see the character in kind of like a like rounded shapes and everything. I like textures just because it keeps it interesting and it keeps your eyes from like, it makes your eyes want to kind of like look at it more and discover new things inside of the actual piece. It kind of gives it also the illusion of more details. Technically it is more details, but it just keeps it like kind of more interesting. For shading, it's not just like making a layer in black and then just lower the opacity. You do have to make sure that the color that you're using it relates to the color and it makes it look like a shadow. So usually like a darker tone of that same color, or maybe something complementary, you can actually make it a little bit more dull. And so you got to play with that. You can kind of get like different things from that. But that's something that I tend to do. For the effects, that's kind of like the finishing touches. I like to do like little details on the eyes and the lips. If it's a certain lighting that I'm doing, I'll make it that color and just like make it as vibrant as I can. The small little hints of fabric textures on the clothing, all that stuff kind of plays into it. You'll see like little lines where the light hits it, and that just gives it the whole illusion of it looking real, or at least my version of real. This is kind of an example of, you know, some of my pieces. This one mainly complementary with the green tones and the reddish tones. And I really wanted to show something like very like, you know, high tech sci-fi. So this was fun for that. Analogous. So the character of Techni, which is her, basically her color is greens and yellows. And so I really wanted to show her with that color scheme, but also the environment around her with that color scheme, and kind of just show how that relates to the character. This one's more of a primary color triad. So chroma with like reds, blues, yellows, and then monochromatic, it just makes everything look much more like serious, much more kind of dramatic in a way. So that's something that I like to play with. But yeah, I mean, usually like, you know, it's got to be like the color that you're using kind of relates to the theme of the story. So like when, for example, when you're watching like a horror movie, you're not really going to see usually a wide range of like bright and saturated colors, but you know, that kind of takes you into the world, into the situation that you're put in. And so I really like to like pay attention to that stuff when I'm making my stories. And that's kind of like the process that I kind of tend to go with when, you know, selecting color and everything. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Diego. I really love, like, you know, you just talking about like color as a way of creating like moods, but then also you're also using color as like identifiers for both like your series. You know, you're sort of like making these like identifying color palettes for specific series, and then also for specific characters is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to like try to make each one a different color scheme, not just because I mean, I get bored of using the same color scheme for one specific story, but it's more like, you know, I've already tried doing this once and I want to challenge myself to do something completely different. And so that really helps me with, you know, kind of keeping it interesting, making me want to like look forward to the next book, and, you know, little things like that. But it also like, I go along with that stuff with not just the color, but the line variation, types of lines that I use, the shapes of the characters. So everything kind of plays into it. Like each book is a different theme, and so that also plays into visual identity of each of the stories.
Nice. Thanks so much, Diego.
Thank you.
Our final presenter for the evening is Yasmin Omar Ata.
Hey, oh, can y'all hear me all right? All right, cool. And sorry if you hear a lot of thunder in the background. There's like a gigantic storm happening outside. So I'm sorry if you hear a little bit of thunder going in. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see this really busted presentation okay? Okay, great. I feel like every time like we test Neil, I have to be like, I'm so sorry. Anyway, coloring is really cool. I freaking love coloring so much. My relationship with color is kind of funky. It started when I didn't used to use color very much, shockingly, until I tried silk screening, and I was pathetically bad at it. I did it for a year and a half and my prints still never turned out right. It was like really sad. However, I learned about really great ink colors such as Rocket Red, which is basically fluorescent ink on paper. And I was like, well, that's cool. Let's see if I can make it work another way. So always turn those L's into learning. Don't worry. All right, color is freaking awesome because you have the potential to create a unique time, mood, space, memory. You can send your reader to a really wonderful place and you can really connect with them through color. Of course, we've spoken about like referencing and color picking and things like that. And thank you to people in the chat who are explaining that, which is, you know, of course, very necessary just to start off and get colors in a good place. However, once you build a color vocabulary, once you kind of reference stuff, make sure you find your own color space. It doesn't always have to be so literal, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but don't be afraid to go gingaga with your colors. Okay, so it's really hard to explain. Let's just get into it. And I want to make sure we have time for questions. Okay, so with my graphic novel, Mishadra, which I made, which is about the epileptic lived experience, about living with seizures, about the things that come with it every single day, and about experiencing seizures themselves, I created 3 different color spaces. On the left, we have sort of like the day-to-day where like very mundane things happen, and it's just kind of like all the motions you go through to keep yourself kind of hanging in there. And then on the right, we have sort of this dream space where things are very surreal, and we kind of have like a similar enough to kind of keep you grounded in the story. Like there's still purple lines, but then you have like the pink and like sort of these bubbles, and it's supposed to send you to a sort of dream space where things are not quite right. And then, sorry, I couldn't fit all of them on one slide. But here we have a 3rd color space, which I use to depict a seizure, minus those skewed panels. Sorry about that, but I didn't want to use any pages that might be potentially triggering. So I just picked one that's very like quiet and sort of benign. But I have like a limited color palette here. We have like red/pink, rocket red, actually, now that I look at it. I think that's just rocket red. L's into lessons. Palette, we've got the red, we've got the blue, and we've got things just off and not right and like kind of shocking to look at. And these indicate all 3 of them, specific moods and vibes that come into the story. They come constantly, they're switching out, these scenes are kind of going in, they're mixing up, and it allows the reader to sort of like know, okay, we're going back to the space, like this is what's going to happen. And the character themselves knows those spaces because of their lived experience. So the color really helps you transport the reader there in a way that line art and other things can't do. It's a very interesting and wonderful component to comics. And so you can give the reader this memory that is associated with it, and you're returning along to that space and that feeling with the other character. Pretty cool. It's kind of like, when you go back to like a town in RPG and you have like really sad feelings about it, like it's kind of like that, but in comic form. The reason why these seizure scenes have such limited palette is because, like I said, it's just something's not right and there's sort of an uncertainty. And this wouldn't be as effective if it was in full color. Sometimes less is more. Oh, sorry. Color can be more than just what's on the page or a hex value or RGB or whatever. Part of the reason why my book and my comic, which is about epilepsy, part of the reason why it's purple is because in the past, historically, amethyst was used to treat epilepsy or thought to, help ease it. And of course, it's also Purple Day in March, which is National Epilepsy Awareness Day. So this choice to have purple be the primary line art color was because of these things. So color can be like, okay, here's, the color, and like look nice and like help a reader connect with the story, but also like within colors, you can have your own symbolism, your own meaning, and add like a whole totally different context to color, which is pretty sick. And I think about this a lot. Like I said earlier, we're coming back to it. Sometimes non-literal is more effective. This is from a different comic. This isn't from Mishadra. So we have a page of a character laying in her bed and she's feeling real bad, real lonely, big mood. And I did kind of have the vocabulary where it's like, here's a wall. This wall is going to be off-white. Here's the bed. The bed is going to be kind of this blue. And that's cool. But then I tweaked these colors to make it less of what you think you would see and more of like the mood, which Karina spoke really awesomely about, just like creating this mood and like this sense of loneliness and sadness. That's not literally what this girl's hair color looks like, but it is more striking and makes you feel kind of, I hope it's conveying a feeling. It helps you feel a little like sad and be like, oh, wow, that's a bummer. But ultimately, I know a lot of people have said they're intimidated by color and they feel, it could be very daunting, but honestly, my philosophy of color is just like, have fun, use what you like and use whatever you think is going to help the mood. It doesn't always have to be perfectly picked, if that makes any sense. Now here, I said this on Twitter, here's my super custom secret Coloring Comics 64 move that I use all the time, and now you're gonna call me out for it in all my comics, you're gonna see it. I can't stand drawing like buildings, walls, like regular rooms. It's just, I'm so bad at it, much like silkscreen. I just can't seem to get a handle on it. And sometimes it's like, okay, well, what can I do to make this work? So here's one weird trick. Interior backgrounds hate it. I misspelled that. Don't look at that. And I call it the diagonal slice, and it's special move. It only uses a tiny bit of your special move meter, and that's why I love it. So a slice of color like this, which you can use, you can either do it yourself manually, or you can use your polygonal select tool in whatever program you use. A slice of color like this drawn over a wall or something like that helps you create a certain sense of depth without making you lose your mind about detail or having to be able to draw this interior. It's small, and it's not, of course, it's not a cure-all or doesn't fix everything, but it really helps you when you're exhausted from drawing rooms, which I definitely am from doing a 248 graphic novel. You're going to tire out from drawing perfectly perspective rooms pretty quickly. So this helps. Again, this is a secret move. It's not, it's not like an instant KO, but I find that it definitely helps. And I hope maybe explaining this also helps other people and helps you stress yourself out less. Okay, that's it. Have fun with your colors, be kind to others. Don't forget to hydrate and stretch. And I hope any of this helped. Ultimately, my philosophy is have fun. Don't be scared. You can do it. Be yourself. Okay, that's it. I hope that helped in any way.
That was great. No, that was really fantastic. So many great like cheat moves and like words of encouragement. And then also like I love like we were talking about like color as mood and then like color as like identifier, and now like color as like meaningful like significant symbolism. That's really fantastic.
Thank you. And people are asking in the chat, what is Gangaga? And Gangaga is my attempt to replace a word with like ableist words. So let's say something like Gangaga. It's more fun than ableist words. So that's nice. What that means for people who are asking. So thank you, everybody.
All right. So now is the time for questions. So if you have a question, you're welcome to either type it in the chat and I'll ask them for you, or you can click on the raise your hand button in the participant section, or possibly I think the reaction section of the menu, and I will start a queue. I think we got one very early on. So I'm scrolling back. And I think the first question that was up here was going back to Karina's, and hopefully everybody else can chime in, is Candace, in reference to the reference photos that you were showing. Candace wrote, "Wow, I love the variety. Where did you find the photos?" And maybe we can expand it to like, where do you find your references for color and that sort of thing?
So I made a Pinterest, which I didn't make for a very, very long time. I think I only made one in like the past year. So yeah, I mean, once you really like get your algorithm right on Pinterest, like it'll kind of start feeding you like things that line up with like boards that you're creating. So it is a really great place to like have an entry point to understanding like an aesthetic. Like something that's helped me a lot also is making like a personal branding board, which like you'll get to see like overarching themes of just things that you're drawn to, because you just kind of infinite scroll on there and just drop in things that you like, and it's almost like you're not really even thinking about it. So it's really cool to like see like it's like a really like just basic attraction to whatever's on there. Definitely though, Pinterest is not great at giving credit. So I definitely encourage, like, if you see images that you really, really like, to, do an image search or click through the link. on Pinterest, to really like, and that'll also, you know, serve you to really open up to more of that artist's work. And if I could, I'll drop the name of a photographer I've been following recently that has really inspired some of my stuff in the chat. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, of course, I'm inspired by like anime and comics as well. I've always been really inspired by Benji Nate, who wrote Catboy, and Masaki Yuasa, who has directed Tommy Galaxy, Night a Short Walk On Girl, many other really cool things. So yeah, so I'll just drop the photographer name in the chat to share.
Cool. Thanks. Diego or Yasmin, do you have thoughts about finding references for your color palettes?
I mean, I find references not just for color, but like in different places. Usually, like, you know, watching movies, that'll like usually give me like a certain like kind of moment that I kind of want to replicate in a way, and then I'll modify it a little bit. Or one thing that I use a lot is actually Google Maps. I'll like get into like the street view, and I'll start like wherever I'm taking the story like taking place, I'll just like find different things, and that'll usually like inspire me. So
I also use Pinterest times, but yeah, credit is not great. Honestly, one of the biggest like inspirations or biggest things that I look at is honestly like really nice high-res photos of like crystals and minerals. Help a lot. I know it's not very literal, but that helps with like palettes, I think, and a very good jumping off point. So that's one thing that is really that I really like doing.
Nice. So and then Suzanne also asks, can you tell us what, it was talked about in the chat, but what is color picking?
Okay, I can answer. Basically, when I talk about color picking in Procreate, it's like really just putting your finger and holding on like a reference image, and it'll just pick up the color. It's also like the eyedropper tool. So if you like color picked from my background, you could pick like this blue here or this teal turquoise thing. So yeah, that's what color picking is.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. I got nothing. That you nailed it. So I got nothing else.
Cool. So I do have a queue for people's questions. And Candace asks, how are you finding digital coloring different and similar to pen and paper coloring?
is that like a question for anybody or? Okay. I mean, they are different. One thing is that like, you know, with traditional colors, like you obviously you're limited to like physically what you have. You can merge, you can blend and stuff, but digital, it kind of like gives you so many different options. Like you have infinite options that you can do. And then once you're done coloring it, you can actually like shift the colors, and you can shift the saturation and modify it in a way. I mean, they're both very different, both have their own pros and cons, but you do get different results from them. Like there's some comics that, you know, I've done that are traditionally colored, and, you know, I look at them and then it's like, you know, there's some certain things that I would have preferred were digital, but then with digital, it's like so in a way perfect that like I kind of wish it had a little bit more character like the traditional. So you get like benefits from both, but yeah.
For me, I just go digitally because my art in a way is kind of like just a series of mistakes bundled together with duct tape. So I like using a digital color. So that's it.
Definitely agree with what Diego mentioned about like the, I guess, character of traditional art, especially if you're coloring on like textured paper. Like something that I really liked from like coloring with markers was like that nice like texture of the paper that comes through. Um, Coloring digitally, like I have started taking that extra step to like kind of like I'll add like a layer of like grain over it, or I'll pull like a paper texture from Google Images and maybe slap it on. Yeah, but otherwise definitely like I'm definitely glad that I started with traditional color, because it was a lot easier to like start with like limited color and then entering like the infinite color sphere. Yeah, that would have otherwise like intimidated me, I think.
Is it okay if before we answer the next question, is it okay if I butt in real quick? I see people kind of talking in the chat about something
For sure.
before the next question that I just want to answer. People are talking about how the bucket tool is a 1 pixel border around the area where the color doesn't fill, and you have to manually adjust for that, things like that. If you're worried about like a pixel border or like things not quite filling the area, you can select the area, and if you're using Photoshop, go to select, modify, expand by 1 or 2 pixels, and that will automatically fill out that space between the liner, and it will help fill in any leaks in your art. Sorry, people were talking about that, and I just really wanted to address that really quickly. Anyway, please go on.
Do you want to expand on that, or like should we jump to that, that question? Or
yeah, we can go to the next question. I just saw people kind of talking about like, oh, this is a problem that I experienced, and I just wanted to add that's like a quick technique that's really going to help you, especially if you're doing print. So anyway,
okay.
Please continue.
Okay. I think our next question is a verbal question from Len. So I think your microphone is on. Oh, but I think maybe we cannot hear you. Okay, so we'll go to the next question. We can go to Dylan, who also has a verbal question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I was just kind of wondering about, we talked about color harmony.
Oh, sorry,
no.
sorry. I was just testing my audio. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. No, we're talking about color harmonies and stuff, and I was finding what Karina said was really interesting, where you had the kind of what was it called, like the color picker, where you circled like certain parts of it as like finding those working within those areas, right? And I was kind of curious about finding color harmonies with regards to like extremely vibrant colors, whether or not that might have a different process, because I find when I try to do like vibrant colors, I just like keep pulling it back until I'm like in a bunch of neutral tones, and it all just kind of seems very flat, right? So I'm wondering if there are like any tips on how to stay within that vibrant area and not be too scared to like, I don't know, have bright colors.
If I may, honestly, a lot of it is trial and error. But if you're using a square like hex like picker, just drag your picker all the way to the top right of that picker, so you get like a really vibrant color, and then just cycle through so you stay on that level of saturation. So just put it there and then go through the palette. So you're always going to get a bright yellow, a bright red, a bright purple, and then just go from there. And, you know, experiment, go Gaga, and then find the ones that you like.
Also, one thing that helps me is like doing it little by little. Just like do maybe like 2 colors and then start adding them on and see if it works. If it doesn't work, switch it to a different color and then just keep adding, but like little by little, you'll get the right color kind of swatch that you want.
Yeah, I agree. As someone who like started like in that corner, like completely saturated, and is now kind of dialing it back. Yeah, I mean, just definitely like look at, your inspirations, look at your references, and understand like, okay, like how much, how many neutrals are they using, and like, I guess kind of figure out like what sorts of like color relationships and like what amount of like neutrals or darker colors you like in relation to those like saturated colors. For me, the relationship is I like neutral with like 1 or 2 pops of color, but yeah, it's mostly just that for me, how I figured it out.
All right, thank you.
Well, thanks, Dylan, for that question. And so now we can go back to Len.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, hi, I'm Eunice. Thank you so much for having this talk. So my question is, do you guys, when you make new work, do you guys worry about not being consistent with color or with your previous style in general?
No. No, I say it's all about fun and experimenting. So deviating from your regular stuff, I think is very healthy. So I think it's okay to not worry about that so much. I know everyone is different. Some people like to stay on brand, but I'm all about experimenting and trying new things. So the short answer is no, and it's okay not to, I think.
God, I wish that were me.
Sorry.
You're so inspiring, actually, though. Yeah,
You're really
I
nice
mean,
and cool.
thank you. Okay. So yeah, I mean, definitely like I'm really big on now just like trying new things, breaking out of it, like trying different forms of media because they will produce like different results also. So something that I tend to do, like I'll go back to traditional because it'll like yield different like color results. Yeah, I mean, my day job is graphic design, so like there's a lot of focus on like branding and like consistency and stuff like that. And like, under capitalism, we're all trying to sell ourselves, I guess, and like be products. And it's really good to break out of that mindset, because we are not brands. And yeah, I agree. Go Gun Gaga, like, just have fun more than anything else. So yeah. Yeah.
And like to add, like even in general, like you don't really have to be aware that you're like doing something differently if you want to like kind of like keep the same style. Like even if you don't realize it, people are still going to see like a bunch of your work and know that it's like the same artist. It's not something that you have to be aware of. Like you'll just work on your stuff naturally, experiment as much as you want. People will know it's your work, and then they'll see the evolution in it.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Len. And then we had a question from Isai, who asks, thoughts on coloring on top of line art layer, which maybe also can you explain what that means?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. Yeah. It's just so hi guys. You guys are doing great, by the way. I saw some amazing artists, like a lot of like some of the best artists that I see online. I always think that people have like a million layers on stuff, but I noticed that some amazing artists, like they literally will just they'll draw out a sketch and they'll paint on top of the sketch. Like they won't even like do another layer. They literally just paint on top of it. And I'm like, how? Like you're crazy. Like I know that technically like that's how you do it, like in physical media, but it's just like, have you guys ever tried to do something similar, or have you guys seen something from an artist that you've been like, how do they do that? And you try to kind of like reverse engineer that. I guess that's a different question, but yes, yeah, kind of that.
I mean, that's just like you gotta be like really confident to do that, I think. It's something that I've seen it done. I've kind of experimented with it a little bit. I like to do a different layer for color just because technology is, you got to use it to your advantage, and like all the tools, there's so many different things that you can do with it. And making a mistake, I'd rather just like erase something with no problem than having to like undo or like recreate the whole thing. But the people that do it, it's pretty cool. And if it works for them, it works for them. But everybody has like their own, and it's good to see them.
Yeah, I think Diego's totally right about that. It does take a lot of confidence. My charisma stat is not high enough, so I don't do that. But like Diego said, if it works for people and it ends up being fun for them, then like go for it. And if thoughts about it, I would say just try it if it's something that you're interested in.
Yeah, it's all about experimenting and having fun.
Cool, thanks. Cool, and it looks like we have time for one more question, which looks like Yu Shu asked like earlier, and we talked about this in the chat, asked about like using magic wands and like having those lines, and he asks sort of like, how do you color your work? Like, do you use the wands or the lassos, or?
I'll say. So I usually just like brush it out and just like manually do a brush. It's something that I'm used to. I've been doing it for so long. I enjoy doing it, so I just do it like that. But every now and then you do have to fill in like large spaces. So it is helpful to use that stuff. There's nothing wrong with using it at all. I would actually like say if you use it, that's really good. I just really enjoy like the process of like kind of like going between the lines and everything with the brush, because it feels like I'm drawing on a coloring book, and it's like something that I've always loved doing. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, for me, I definitely use the magic wand tool when I'm coloring. It kind of mostly started out practicality because doing graphic novel work, it is, it at some point you're like, I gotta do this really fast. And then with the select, modify, expand trick, it really helps sort of fill out those lines. So I started using that for like printing work, and because I was using it for like hundreds of pages, it just ended up being what I do by default. And I know the earlier question version of the question asks is it discouraged, and I would say absolutely not. Like just do whatever is going to make it easier for you. So using the magic wand and using the fill tool can really help you out. So if that's something that people want to try, then it can be very helpful. But everyone has their own way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I also use the fill tool. I use Procreate, and the fill tool I think is like it's pretty crisp most of the time. But sometimes I do get that, like white line that we were talking about, and I'll just fill that in manually with a brush. But for smaller things, like for smaller details, I will just color them manually. I'll brush them in. Yeah.
And also for like people that work on Procreate, like it's whenever you use like the fill tool, you can like when you drag the color down to where you want to do it, hold on to like the thing still, and then just like move it a little bit to the right, and it'll actually like expand the pixels that you're doing. So yeah, Procreate has like a lot of like features that they're kind of hidden. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good tip also, because sometimes like I will fill like let's say I have like a yellow next to a blue and I want to change, like just drop the fill to change the yellow to an orange, but sometimes like if it's at like 100% fill, like that orange will leak into the blue, which is just a thing Procreate does by itself. So yeah, when you're dropping a color in, just, yeah, like Diego said, hold it, slide it around left and right. So that'll adjust the percent of the fill.
That is fascinating. I had no idea. Cool. Thank you so much. Wanted to ask the panelists if they have any closing thoughts on color. And if not, that's okay.
I guess I guess my closing thoughts on color is that like it can be really daunting. It can be like really like intimidating for a lot of people, but like just thinking about the possibilities that you have, like don't be afraid of it. Like in my general approach to comic is like don't be afraid and just like do you. So I would say closing thoughts on color is just like you have endless possibilities and like work into it and just bring yourself to like to your entire comic, but also to your colors. That's it.
Think of it like a coloring book, you know, make sure that it's fun. It's just have fun with it.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess figure out what you like, and it's a really cool way to learn more about yourself and, you know, how you want to make yourself feel and how you want, you know, people that you share your art with to feel. And yeah, definitely like color has so much meaning, you know, literal, cultural, and just emotionally. So yeah, it's a really great tool that I definitely was too scared of because it was so loaded. But yeah, don't be scared. Go Gungaga.
Yes, I'm so glad to see that Gungaga is catching on. It's fun, and you know, it's always great to just find alternatives for ableist language. So I'm glad. Okay.
I'll totally start using that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks to Yasmin, to Karina, and to Diego for your presentations and the great conversation. And thanks to everybody who asked such wonderful questions. Those were really fantastic. And the chat was really lively, and that was really great. I've pasted links to our presenters' websites. Please visit their websites, check out their work, support them however you can so that they can keep making awesome comics and art. I'm also pasting in links to some Radiator Comics Studio stuff, and I'm going to share my screen real quick to talk about a couple upcoming events. And so this Sunday, on the 29th of August at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we are hosting our semi-monthly social event, Cartoonist Coffee, at which cartoonists of any experience level are welcome to get together for casual small group conversations. And then next Tuesday, August 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, I'll be interviewing Miami-Dade public librarians Stephanie M. Garcia, who's the head of the Special Collections and Archives, and Jonathan Quinones, the young adult department supervisor at the Miami branch, or the main branch of Miami-Dade Public Library, about Miami-Dade Public Library System's Special Collections and Archives, what it holds, and how zinesters and cartoonists can utilize and contribute to it. That's going to be very exciting. And then every single Friday, we host from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Open Studio, which is time for people to work on their comics in the telepresence of others. You're concentrating on your work. We have a few breaks where you can socialize with people so you can get stuff done, and you can also meet people. It's always a highlight of the week. And in addition to these social events, we have a Discord through which you can chat with other cartoonists and learn about upcoming comics opportunities. And then lastly, we still have copies of the Sun and Sand comic anthology, which Radiator Comics co-published with Black Jose Press. It features 10 wonderful comics about South Florida, including Mango Season by Karina Vo. Plus the cover is by Karina, and Karina drew the comic that Jamila Rouser wrote for the comic. So it's like mostly Karina. That's not true. But if you are a Karina fan, this is a must read. If you go to sunsandcomics.wordpress.com, you can read them for free online. You can download a PDF for free, or you can request a physical copy. And if you cover the postage, we will mail a copy to you to your mailbox. So those are all the announcements that I had. But I wanted to thank one more time Yasmin Omar Ata, Diego Infante, and Karina Vo for the wonderful presentations. Thank you all for joining in and having this conversation. Hope everybody has a safe and also drawing-filled and colorful week. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Bye. Hydrate.
Yes. Bye.